So we start with early Islamic art, and early in Islamic history, these artists are going to blend various artistic influences to create something uniquely their own. Of course, you have this basic problem, which is Islam, the religion, the culture, has developed and exploded with such speed that they can't really develop their own artistic traditions yet. It's going to take time for that to happen. So much like the Greeks interacting with the Egyptians and borrowing from the Egyptians, the Islam, especially early Islam, will borrow from the cultures surrounding them. Now, the armies of Islam arrive in Jerusalem very early on. In 638, the Muslim Caliph is going to be assisted by the Jews in capturing the city from the Persians. The Persians at the time are Zoroastrian. They're not going to be Muslim. The Islam would have seen them as pagan, as someone who does not follow their faith. And one of the earliest pieces that we see is actually the Dome of the Rock. And here we're seeing an aerial perspective because I want to point out a couple of things. So when Islam moves into Jerusalem under the Umayyad dynasty, they want to erect a Muslim shrine. And this is the earliest Islamic monument, or one of them, to survive relatively intact. Now, this is at the site of the Temple Mount, or it's on the Temple Mount. And what happens is this becomes very important because Muhammad, in one of his visions, God appears to him and says, go to the furthest mosque that exists. And he does, and that mosque is in Jerusalem. And when he gets there, we have a miracle that happens where Muhammad actually ascends into heaven and speaks to some of the prophets as well as God himself before returning to earth. And the site of that is the Dome of the Rock. But also, the site of the Dome of the Rock is the site of the Holy of Holies of King Solomon's temple, is believed to be on this site. Also, this is believed to be where Abraham attempted to sacrifice his son Isaac. And it may have some ties to Adam as well. And what we have is the Dome of the Rock in the center, and this smaller building is actually called the Dome of the Chain. This is another element of that trip that Muhammad takes to Jerusalem. And this is all on the Temple Mount, which gives you some idea of why this is such a difficult structure to deal with today. Now, the Temple Mount is historically where we see the Temple of Solomon. Here we have the Western Wailing Wall, and it's right beneath what is today the Dome of the Rock. Then there's a massive mosque on one side, and that mosque is the Mosque of Jerusalem. It sits on the site of the mosque that Muhammad would have been going to visit at the time. So it gives you an idea of the layout and where everything would have been. When we look at the Dome of the Rock itself, it's built by Syrian architects, but they're trained in the Byzantine tradition. It looks very much like a Byzantine structure. And it looks like a central plan church. It's octagonal. We have the dome in the center. They're borrowing from the Byzantine. Again, they don't have time to develop their own tradition quite yet. And all of that work that you see is all tile work, some of which, especially when we get inside, can be tied to the Mosaic tradition of the Byzantine Empire. When we look inside, the fact that it's a central plan really stands out. By the way, this is not a mosque, this is a shrine, so you would not go there to pray as such. And what you're going to do is you have an ambulatory surrounding. We actually have two of them, an inner and outer ambulatory, and in the center we see a barren rock. And here we see inside the Dome of the Rock. Here's the rock itself that Muhammad ascended into heaven from. Surrounding it, we have this gold background, very Byzantine, with these mosaics. But you'll notice all of the mosaics are plant life or geometric forms or in some cases vases and other vessels. But it's all aniconic. There are no people being depicted. The vines here are not just decorative. They actually speak to the idea of paradise in the Garden of Eden. And then we also see up in the black above these quotations in Kufic. These are quotations from the Quran, no different than a church today, which would have quotations from various elements of scripture. You'll also notice they're using the arch, the Roman idea here that the Byzantines, of course, are very familiar with, except that they're striping the arch. This motif will be quite common in Islamic art and will actually come into the West and be used in some Gothic, Romanesque and Gothic structures.